Hi, my name is Greg Canty, and I'd like to welcome you to the Win Happy podcast. I love chatting to people from all walks of life about their lives and their careers, about the choices they make along the way to pursue their happiness, and what winning actually means to them. I hope you enjoy these conversations as much as I do. Thanks for listening. On today's podcast, I chat with author, restaurateur, healer and teacher David Ellis. David's story is extremely interesting, and in the very competitive and demanding hospitality sector, he went from being the emotionless Hatchet man to being someone that his colleagues could barely recognise. After his father passed away, something very strange and quite unbelievable happened to him, which changed the course of his life. Let's hear that story. David Ellis, a huge welcome to the Win Happy podcast. How are you doing?
Thanks, Craig. Thank you. It's great to be here. I'm good today.
Yeah, my very good friend. And it's kind of one of these unusual relationships because, I don't know, with Infusion, we're going 25 years this year and clients come and clients go. Our relationship with you, I think, happened right in the middle of the Celtic Tiger meltdown.
Absolutely, yeah.
You had just started a particular retail operation, and there were a few other bits and pieces that you were doing as well. Of course, at the time, I think you were still very positive. Let's push out there. Let's continue to promote the business. We engaged with you for a while, but I just think the ill winds that were blowing at that time were just a little bit too chilly for us to continue. So, yeah, like everything else, I think we just had a polite conversation about it. You said we need to stop that activity. And I'd say 99 times out of 100, that would be fine. We'd all walk away and that's grand. But in our case, I think we discovered people that we liked and the friendship continued for many, many years. So, so it's a special relationship that we have, which is really good, and it stood the test of time and everything else.
Yeah, I feel exactly the same. I mean, what I have discovered in my life is that you meet people along your journey and you resonate and connect with those people at a particular frequency and a particular energy level. Most people don't grasp that. They don't see it. I see it very, very clearly. And when I connect with people, then and when that connection is reciprocated, it leads to a whole different quality of a relationship. It's like it wouldn't matter if I didn't speak to you for a year, 2 years, 5 years, Craig. If I got back on the phone, you would go, "Oh, Dave, hi, how are you?" And likewise, it's just very, I don't know. It happens frequently, but not very often, if you understand.
Yeah. And during the course of that, getting to know you and everything, you shared a story with me, which I think pretty much changed the course of your life and your career and maybe how you approach things. And I've repeated that story a number of times, a particular experience that you had, which is really interesting. And I'm not going to spoil the podcast now and just throw it out there. The listeners are going to have to bear with us while we get to that moment. But it is going to come in our conversation. So what I'd like to do is start where I normally start with some of these guests. And they're going to hear that story and how it had a big change in your life. So I'm going to start by asking you, who the hell are you and where did you come from?
Who am I? Where I came from is probably an easier question. I originally came from Drimna in Dublin. I was born to Edward and Eileen. My dad was called Teddy for some bizarre reason. Everybody knew him as Teddy. And we didn't have much money. We were particularly poor in the 60s. You know, if you didn't have shoes on your feet, but that was perfectly okay. And because the other kids didn't have shoes either. So there was no such thing as one-upmanship or trying to compete against anybody. Nobody had money. Where we lived in Drimna, nobody had money. But we had a family unit, and in that family unit, my parents were particularly good at loving us. My parents loved us very, very much, and in turn, the kids loved them. So that was kind of where I came from. Who I was then and who I am now are very, very much different people, apart from the fact that I was 50 years younger. But when I was a kid, I didn't really know who I was, of course, as most kids don't. When I was quite young, when I was about 11, I knew I was different to other boys. I didn't know what that difference was. I couldn't identify it or articulate it because there were no such words in our vocabulary in our home for gay or faggot or queer or any of those things. But I knew that I was different and that I liked boys and not girls. But I didn't kind of allow it to bother me too much. As I grew a little bit older, maybe 12 or so, I do remember I used to pray to God when I believed that God was Jesus. And I used to pray to Jesus every night. And I used to cry and I used to beg him to fix me because there was something broken in me because I wasn't like everybody else. And then I used to pray that I would find some lovely woman and lovely girl and get married and have kids, because this is what one did back in the 60s and 70s. That was the mission statement, if you like. That's where we were all about. But that wasn't to be. And so what that did for me was I lived a very, very closeted life. Nobody knew anything about me, about my sexuality. I started to work. I left school when I was 14. I hated school. I was bullied in school. The teachers bet the crap out of me in school. I didn't have a good time. So I left when my intermediate certificate was done. And back then, I don't know whether you remember, but back then, if you failed Irish, you failed everything. So I did very well in English, maths, business, economics, and art, but I failed Irish, which meant I failed everything. And my dad wanted me to go back to school, and I didn't want to go back. So I went to work for my brother. He had a shop at the time, and I went to work for him, which was an experience in itself. Eventually, I couldn't stick him anymore, so I left. I came home, and my mum used to send me to these interviews for factory workers. So I would be shipped off on a bus to the other side of the city to go for an interview in a factory. Now, I didn't want to work in a factory. I was only 15 at the time, but I knew I didn't want to work in a factory. I wanted to work in retail, but something different to retail. And I wanted to work for myself. But I had no idea how I was going to do that because my dad worked in Bord Gáis all his life. My sister worked there. Her husband worked there. It was a way of life. Nobody worked for themselves. So I was a dreamer. I wanted to work for myself. I used to go for the interviews. I didn't attend. I used to stand outside the factory. I would get in the bus and come home. And one day I arrived home and Mum said, "How did you get on?" And I said, "No, I didn't get the job." And my Mum never hit me, ever. But this day she drew out and she clattered me. And she told me that the man had rang and I didn't turn up for the interview. So there was murder at home, of course, because I didn't attend the interview and I lied, basically. My dad said, maybe not to go for jobs in factories and to go for the kind of job that I was more interested in, which was also a struggle. I went to different retailers. I went to clothing shops. I didn't play football at the time, but every damn shop I went to, they wanted to talk about football at my interview. And of course, I didn't know about football. So I pretended I did. And of course, I lied and therefore didn't get the job because I was lying. Eventually, I did get the job I wanted. I got a job as a barman, an apprentice barman, where back then being an apprentice in the bar trade was like being a plumber or an electrician. It was a big thing. I was really happy. But the big problem I had back then was I was painfully shy. And suddenly I'm now in a bar filled with men, which men were my ghosts. They're my demons. So I'm now standing in behind the bar, and there's 40 men all lined up, looking for their pints. And I'm in there, and I'm shy. I'm so shy. People used to say to me, "What's your name?" I used to say Dave, and they go, "Oh, Maeve is here," which made things even worse. Eventually, I got over all that. It's amazing how the bar business can take your shyness and your introvertness away from you. So it was a good thing. The other great thing about that bar was that you had to go to college, the College of Marketing and Design. And on your 2 days off every week, you had to go to college. But I couldn't get a place in the college because I had no education. But the owner of the bar found a way in for me. So I ended up being able to go to college. And the remarkable thing was that I ended up being the second top student each year for the 3 years I was there, because now I was learning something that I loved. Apart from the fact that we also did maths, we did English, but now I was learning about business, I was learning about product generation and product manufacturing and so on. So it was very, very interesting. And it stood to me hugely for the rest of my days.
Wow. You mentioned being gay and, that being a very kind of private conversation you were having with yourself. Did you have it with anyone else at all? Where were you going to as a reference point? Were you reading? There was no Mr. Google, I presume, at that stage. Were you going to the library? Were you chatting to your parents? Did your parents have any idea? Or
No. They would have. My parents would have sent me off to be an altar boy or to be a priest if they had any inclination that I was gay. They wouldn't have been able to handle that at all. I did nothing. I spoke with nobody. I would read odd clippings in the newspaper because it was back in the day when Daddy used to bring home a newspaper every night. So I would read clippings about what that man did and that man did. And there was a great guy, a politician called Emmett Stagg, I think his name was. And he was in the news quite often because he was up in the Phoenix Park picking up rent boys.
Yeah, I remember that.
So now suddenly I'm aware, Phoenix Park and rent boys. So that's something that I wasn't aware of. So perhaps I should spend some time up in the Phoenix Park and explore what that's all about. I didn't at the time. I was too shy, so I didn't. I ended up, what basically I did, I built this wonderful shield for myself of a career. So I built a career. I'm not sure whether I'm supposed to say this, but you can edit it out if I'm not allowed. I became known as the man with the fuck off face when I was the manager of anywhere, because nobody was allowed to get in. Nobody could see me. So I managed hotels, and I was that man that was completely shielded. Business was all that mattered. I worked 7 days a week. I never took holidays. And I did that until I was 28. So I shielded myself from the world, and I became really a great hotel manager. But I was shielded from the world. Nobody could see in. Nobody knew anything about me. But inside, I was dying. I was dying of death because there was no way I was going to try and meet a girl or a woman. And women, of course, women would present themselves and you would do the honourable thing and you would go out for a date with them and that. But that's as much as I wanted. I didn't want any more, and I didn't want to lead them astray either and pretend to them that, oh, everything is rosy. So basically, I hid my entire feelings behind my career until one day, when I was 28, I had become incredibly good at reducing people to tears. It didn't matter who they were. I had this master skill of just dropping people to their knees. And one day I was at home, I went home to see my mum, and she said something that annoyed me, and I dropped her to her knees. She was sobbing, and as a result, I was upset because I had hurt my mum. And she asked me to go to seek help. And I said I would think about it. And I thought about it, and I said, okay, I'll go and I'll seek help. And I arranged to go and meet a counsellor.
And seeking help for what? For being aggressive or cold or something? Or
she felt I had become incredibly aggressive.
Yeah, and in a way, I'm listening to you on that industry that you were in. And if I go back to that time, I'd make two observations. One, if I go back to secondary school, so I did my Leaving Cert in 1982, so you can figure out late 70s, 80s, whatever. I couldn't tell you one person that I was in school with, and it was a big school, that was gay. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't tell you. And in a class of 30, geez, do the maths. Would there be 5 people? I've no idea. I've no idea what. Yeah. But I couldn't tell you one person that I ever came across who was gay. There might have been one, remember, with the desk in school. Remember there was one time when one of the lads would be sitting very, very close to you, whatever, like, okay, well, we all might think, geez, that's a bit weird. He's invading my personal space. But maybe being in the changing room for PE, the 45 minutes of exercise you get in a whole week of school, and there'd be a bit of larking around about people pulling up their underpants and all that kind of stuff, or trying to change discreetly, and it was all larking around. And even going forward, if you were to ask me, when was the first time you really knew a gay person? Now, I'm not living out in the sticks. I'm living in Cork City. And at 17, I'm working, and we're in the business world and everything else. I had fast food restaurants. And I remember one of the guys, a great young kid, Connor, great lad. He was one of our neighbours, just a kid in college. And he was opening up the place, closing up at night, dealing with rowdy customers, all that kind of stuff. And we promoted him to being a manager, which probably meant he was going to get an extra 50 pence per hour or 50 cents per hour. And I remember he came to me one day and asking me the question, why did you promote me? Why did you choose me? And I thought that was a strange question for him to be asking. And another day, he knocked on my front door at home and asked, could we have a chat? And he told me he was gay. And would that make a difference?
Wow, yeah.
And I thought, I was like, I'm going to use a bit of language now. I don't give a fiddler's one way or the other way. You're Connor, you're a great guy, I have no issue. And he was asking me, was I not going to like him suddenly? And I have no idea, good, bad, or indifferent, whether his parents do or anything. That was one thing I was going to share with you. The other thing I was going to say to you is that to be a boss or to be a manager back in those days, you were no good if you were soft.
Oh, absolutely.
If you were a good manager, you had to have the skill of taking someone's head off. Screaming and roaring at them in the workplace was a good thing to do. Making people fear you was part of being a good manager. If you could fire people without remorse, my God Almighty, you were headed for the top. So you had a very unusual combination of skills. In one breath, hiding from yourself, and on the other breath, this was playing to your advantage in a weird sort of a way.
Yeah, I mean, the problem about hiding, Greg, is when you don the Batman suit, over time you become Batman. So you lose all sense of self. You lose that essence of who I was, that empathic young boy that I used to be. That was now gone. I now was the monster in the suit. And my ability to hire and fire, my ability to reduce people. I mean, I fired my mother, so and I used to say this to people so that they would understand the type of the man I was. I'm going to hire you today, but remember, I fired my mother, so if you mess up, you're gone. To make it crystal clear. Of course, now when I look back with my knowledge of psychology and everything else, I can clearly see why I needed to go to a counselor at the time and where the anger and where the aggression was all stemming from. But back to that visit to the the poor fucker, that poor man that I went to see. I donned my Batman suit that day. I put on the sharpest black suit that I had, snow white shirt, flaming red handkerchief, flaming red tie, and I was out for battle. And I was going to show him who was who, which was a bit counterproductive if you think about it. Because
I think it might have been.
Someone asked me to go for help, and I'm going to show him I don't need help. So I sit down in front of this guy, and I'm putting him in his box so that we're nice and clear where we are. And he blindsided me 5 or 6 times in a row, and he had me crippled and sobbing within 15 minutes. I attended him for 6 months. And when I was finished with attending him, I was a business consultant when I started. So I was finished managing hotels, and now I own my own business consultancy. And I specialized in helping hotels and restaurants that were in trouble. When I was finished with him in 6 months, I could no longer be a business consultant. I couldn't do the job because my style of fixing problems was merciless. And I realized that wasn't the way that you did this job. And I couldn't do it any other way. So I had to reinvent myself completely after that 6-month period. Yes, sure, I now found myself. I now was out. I was gay, even though that man never mentioned gay. But I was out. I was gay. I told my sister, and in turn, she told my other sisters, and she also told my mum. My mum was upset for a very different reason than I thought she was going to be. My mum was upset because 2 things. 1, I didn't tell her, and I was her friend. And 2, I was going to be lonely when I got older. So to solve the loneliness problem, she said, why don't you package up the gay thing, whatever that is, find a girl, have kids, and just forget about it. Yeah. And I said, that's not going to happen, Mum.
And to be fair to her, I'd say she wasn't the only mother to give that advice to a son. And I'm sure we've come across that so many times since, where David settled down with a wife, they had 2 kids, and 20 years later, he decides to be who he always was.
Yes, exactly.
And he leaves this cozy arrangement, or whatever language. Actually, I was watching the Guinness Netflix.
I haven't started yet.
Yeah. So Arthur was gay, and but of course that was going to be shocking at that time.
Right.
So there was an arranged marriage, and it was all up front. The woman knew exactly what she was getting into. It's like, you know that the deal. I'm going to look for my fulfillment or my satisfaction. I don't know what word they used in other areas.
Right.
You're quite entitled to do the same as long as no one hears about it. They're the conditions, and so that was so that was your mother. Your mother was in the same boat.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and she couldn't understand why I couldn't park this side of myself, which I'd parked for 28 years, She couldn't understand why I couldn't. She didn't get angry with me or anything like that. I mean, she was very understanding. And about 2 years later, I introduced her to a boyfriend of mine, and she couldn't really relate to him. So she struggled with that dynamic, which was fine. I understood that, and so we didn't go there again. My mum was 78 or 76, so it was fine because now I had found myself. I was able to deal with myself much better and much more efficiently because now I was looking at work from a more empathic place, and I was looking at my relationships in the same way. And of course, then I was like a 17-year-old child who had just found sex for the first time because, that's the process we go through.
But you had to reinvent yourself as a professional as well.
Well, I had to give up the consultancy business because I couldn't do it.
You have to leave the Hatchet man behind.
Absolutely. And then I bought the Shack restaurant at the time, 26 years ago. And I started to develop the restaurant business. So I bought that, and then I opened up another Shack restaurant on Dame Street. And then I just started to open restaurants. But I was no longer running away from who I was. I now knew firmly who I was. But what I was also making sure was that my weakness at the time of being gay was not going to be used against me in terms of business. I was going to be a successful businessman, irrespective of my sexuality. Basically driven. My sexuality drove me to be successful.
And professionally, I'm just curious, was there anyone in your professional circle who you still work with who would have experienced the Hatchet man, David, and the post-Hatchet phase?
Yeah, actually, they still work for me, Greg. I mean, the manager of my restaurant in Dublin, I mean, she regularly says to me, that they were terrified of me when they met me first. Terrified me because I had just bought that restaurant just before I completed my counselling, and they were completely terrified. I didn't speak to them when I arrived into work. My thing would be I come in the door and I go, that table over there is dirty, the legs on that chair are dirty, that picture is crooked, the wine list is wrong, blah 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 blah. There was no involvement in humanity at all. It was purely business.
Yeah.
And it took me a long time to reverse out of that.
They must have been wondering, who in the name of God is after walking through the door today?
Well, absolutely.
And not trusting it, I would say.
Well, there was a change in me. I mean, I changed radically in my approach. But I still kept some of my basic principles. I always believed in hierarchy in terms of structure. My manager always disagreed with hierarchy. She wanted me to be in there with the KP and, telling him how great his job was. And I used to say, but I'm telling you, and it's your job to tell them. And, along that journey of the restaurant, there is no job in any restaurant or any hotel that I have not done. Kitchen porter, making beds, it didn't matter. I believed and always believed that any hotel manager or any restaurant manager worth their salt will make the point of making sure they do every single job so that they know how difficult that job is.
Question for you. What's the more successful restaurant? The one that's been run by Hatchet Man David, or the one that's been run by empathetic, caring, warm, loving David?
That's a trick question.
Yeah.
And it's a very difficult one because We had a restaurant called Purple Ocean out in Dunleary.
I remember it.
That restaurant was based on a spiritual theme of crystals, particularly amethyst. So obviously my entire energy based in that restaurant was surrounding spirituality and therefore empathy. I failed. I failed miserably out there. The restaurant I have in Temple Bar, I continued to, even though I softened in my approach, but I continued to keep quite a rigid profile in terms of rules and engagements and controls. So they didn't alter, they didn't change. And I had taken the stance many years ago that I wasn't actually going to work in that restaurant. I wasn't going to work in any restaurant, because in order to work in a restaurant, you need to be a particular type of person. You need to be a people person. And I am not a people person. I'm very good with one-on-one clients. I'm very good with people with problems who want to solve their problems. I am not good with people who are drunk, who arrive at the door, who are going to leave a shitload of money with me, but it's not worth it. I'm not good with it. I did work a little bit in Purple Ocean. The managers used to beg me not to be there. They used to beg me to go. I didn't work in the Shack and Temple Bar for that reason. I'm not good at it. When I managed hotels and restaurants for others, I was the puppeteer. I was the guy behind the scenes, always making it all work. And even today, I mean, I live in Spain. My restaurant's in Dublin. I orchestrate everything from a distance. So I don't deal with the customers. I don't deal with the staff because I'm not able to. I'm no longer able to dealing with staff in a Hatchet environment. Just like our most recent problem that we've had, I found it incredibly hurtful what happened. Whereas before, 20 years ago, I wouldn't have found it hurtful at all.
20 years ago, would it have happened? The listeners won't have heard this during the course of our conversation. So it's a particular scenario in work. Basically, someone was, happens a lot with cash businesses. Someone finds a way of getting a bit of money for themselves, and that's fine. And, it happens a bit too often across the board. I wonder if that particular character was working for Hatchet Man David, or this version of David. Might the same thing have happened? Maybe it would have done. I'm not sure. What do you think?
In this particular case, it would have happened.
Yeah, okay.
But the nature of the being in question would have pushed all the boundaries always to the limits. And hence my approach in business: lead not into temptation, close all the doors and keep on closing. Every time somebody finds an opening, close it. Forget about trying to establish who's to blame. Just close the damn door and move on. I remember I used to be a gym bunny. I was a personal trainer up in Westwood in Leopardstown. I was very, very fit, very strong, very muscular, loved what I did, loved personal training. I used to train clients before I went to work. And then afterwards, I would train myself. So one day I'm up on the treadmill and I'm running away. And this woman came up to me and she said, "Oh, I was in your restaurant last night." So everybody knew me there. And loads of the clients ate in my restaurant. And she said, "Oh, we were in your restaurant last night and it was great." And they had a lovely time. And she said, "Oh, by the way, David, I hope you get your EPOS system fixed." So I'm running away and I was like, "Oh, is it broken?" And she said, yeah, the poor waitress, she had to add the wine on manually. I said, "Oh, okay." Couldn't wait to get off the treadmill, into the change room, shower, change, bang, into the car, on the phone. What's wrong with the EPOS system? Nothing. There's nothing wrong with the EPOS system. So I got into the restaurant and we discover that the little barmaid is in there and she's dishing out bottles of wine and manually writing them on the customer's bill, pocketing the cash for the wine. The customer is okay, our wine is down, and, like, we caught her. But there was no point in trying to challenge that. I remember sitting her down and saying, "This is what you've done." And she said, "Yeah." And I said, "I'm going to call the guards." And she said, "Go on, call them. This is a civil matter. This is not a criminal matter." So I said, "Look, you're fired." And she said, "Yeah, okay, I'm fired." So she went and she took a job around the corner in another restaurant in Temple Bar. And I rang the owner and I said, so-and-so is taking a job with you. And he was like, "Yeah, she's brilliant." And I said, "Well, you want to be careful. Sour grapes, Dave, sour grapes. You're just sorry you lost her." I said, "Okay." 6 months later, he rings me up and he says, "That bitch is after robbing me. She's after robbing me 1,000. And I was like, "Yeah, but I told you, you wouldn't listen."
Well, I think, considering what she was doing with the wine, sour grapes was a very apt description.
Yeah.
There's probably no right or wrong answer, whether it's the Hatchet Man person running that place or the more empathetic person. It has to be the business that you want to operate. And you have to be right with how you go about it one way or the other, don't you?
Exactly. And whatever that is. I mean, being the Hatchet Man is not the right way to motivate people. The way to motivate people is with kindness and discipline. So it's kindness and discipline. It's a balance. Hatchet Man is really not the key. It's no different to raising kids. There's kindness and there's discipline, and it's a balance between both.
Yeah.
The Hatchet Man in my life served a purpose for the time that it was in existence, and then it was gone, and I couldn't be that person now.
So that was a big change, but there were more big changes to come, weren't there?
In what sense?
In your life?
Oh yeah, well, I mean, like I was dedicated to business.
Yeah.
Back then, and then and I was still dedicated to business. Everything was going relatively well. Now, when I say relatively well, it didn't mean that every restaurant I opened turned to gold. I mean, I own 12 restaurants and 3 hotels, a bundle of retail units and serviced office units. They didn't all work. Some of them failed. Some of them lost. And the big key is to identify what was the failing, what went wrong, how did it break to the point that it's completely broken. Analyze all of those, and then take all of those lessons to make sure that you don't actually fall into that trap again. I mean, one of my big failings in the earlier days was I would see a restaurant property, for example, and if it failed for you, I then wanted a piece of it because I wanted to prove I could make it work. That was a mistake because I didn't do due diligence in terms of market research, or location, or all of the things I talk about in my book, of all the things you're supposed to do before you open a restaurant, and also identifying the type of people who open restaurants. I was a very odd person to open a restaurant, but it worked for me. It served me well. A lot of people open restaurants because, well, it's very trendy, and it's very trendy to say you own a restaurant. There's some great celebrities in Dublin who own pubs and restaurants who haven't a breeze how they work or operate. They have no clue. And when they fail, their companies go poof, and all the people who supported them lose their money. I think it's wrong. But that's just my opinion. And that is the non-Hatchet Man David speaking.
You told me a story about a particular night in your life when you woke up petrified and something happened, and your dog was with you.
Yes. Yeah. My dad had just died. He was dead maybe 3 months, 4 months. something happened around the time my dad died. This was where it all started. I used to go and see him every day. He was in hospital. He was kind of in a semi-coma, and all the family used to go and see him. And we sat by his bed. And my sister said to me, now my sister is as spiritual now as the bird flying past the balcony now. She said to me, there's something happening between you and Dad. And she said, I feel that you're gaining all his energy. He's giving you all his energy. And it was the bizarrest thing to say, because I also experienced something that I couldn't articulate. I couldn't explain it then, can't explain it now. But in essence, what she was saying felt exactly right. So one of the days I said, look, I'm going to go to the restaurant and have a cup of coffee. Daddy was in James's hospital, which was about 15 minutes drive at the time. I said, I'm going to go back to the restaurant, have a cup of coffee, check on everything, and I will be back. And as I was leaving, I knew he was going to die when I was gone. I also knew that if I stayed, he wasn't going to die. So I was leaving anyway. So I left and I arrived at my restaurant. My brother rang me and said, Dad has just passed away. And I said, yeah, okay, I'll come back. So I came back. And when I arrived, I felt this incredible energy that I knew that my dad was here, that he was still here. And I went into the room and I gave him a kiss. He was dead, but I felt he was still there. And then all of a sudden I felt this energy leave the room and I knew he was gone. And my sister arrived just moments later and she said, is Dad still here? And I said, no, he's just after leaving this moment. So that was all very, very new for me. I didn't understand any of that. Kind of put that behind me. The funeral was the funeral, and got through all of that. Helped my mum the best I could, dealing with her grief. And one night then I'm at home. I live in this beautiful house in Sandyford, and I live there with my dog, Snoopy. And Snoopy used to sleep on the floor up in the bedroom. And he was always there. He was always by my side. And I wake up one night and I feel that somebody is kneeling on my chest and they're strangling me, but there's nobody there. But I can't breathe. And I can feel this grip around my neck. And it wasn't the grip and it wasn't the fact that I couldn't breathe and it wasn't the pressure on my chest that terrified me. It was the sense that there's a presence in the room that I don't know what it is. So I was always the kind of person, Greg, that, I want to see what's coming down the line here. I always want to see what's ahead of me. I want to see what's around the corner. I want to know what's coming. And here I am, and I'm in a situation where I don't know what's coming, and I have no idea what's going on. So I'm trying to scream out through my voice for the dog because I want the dog to jump up on the bed. But there's no sign of the dog, which terrified me even more because he never left my side. So I'm now really terrified. And eventually it lets off. But the strange thing was that just before it let its grip off, I started saying a prayer to Archangel Michael. I don't even know how I knew this prayer. It wasn't a prayer that I said regularly, but I was repeating this prayer to Saint Michael, Archangel Michael. This lifted off me. I sensed it moving to the end of the bed, which meant now that I'm on the bed, no dog, and there's an energy presence at the end of the bed, and the door is beyond the end of the bed. So there's no getting out of the room. Couldn't go back to sleep, lay there praying, saying this mantra over and over and over again. Eventually, dawning came, the light came in the window, and eventually I got out of bed. Now I was terrified. I was so terrified that I gathered my belongings, my clothing, and I stuck them into a bag with one eye stuck over my shoulder all the time. And I came down the stairs, and the dog was shaking, and I gave him a hug, and I put him out the back. I figured he was going to be safe outside, out the back. So I put him out, and I got into my car, and I had a hotel at the time, and I drove down to the hotel, because down in the hotel I could have a shower, and I could stay there if I needed to. So I don't tell anybody what's going on, because it sounds nuts. So I say nothing. So I go up to my office. We were in the middle of refurbing the hotel, so I took one of the old bedrooms as my office. So I'm working away in my office, and behind me I hear somebody is after checking in, and they're having a shower in behind me. And then I realized that the room behind me is off because it needs to be refurbed. So I ring down to reception and I say, why did you sell the room behind me instead of selling another room? And she said, no. She says, there's nobody in that room. And I said, do you think I'm stupid? I can hear them in the room. There's somebody inside in the room. They're in the shower at the moment. And the receptionist said, no, I'm sorry, David, there isn't anybody in the room. So I'm thinking, it must be the builder. He's going to have a shower. So I ring down looking for the builder. So the builder comes up. He says, what's wrong with you, David? And I'm like, do you hear what I hear behind me? And he said, no.
Oh, dear.
I said, okay. And he said, what? Tell me. He said, you're gone green. He said, tell me what's wrong. I said, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Trust me. He said, no, come on, tell me. I said, will you come into the room behind me? Will you come into the room next door with me? He said, sure. Went into the room, hadn't been touched. So now I'm really terrified, right? So I come back into my office, he goes downstairs, and that energy that I felt earlier was now here again. And I thought, fuck this. I just don't know what to do. I was really frightened.
I hope you can join me in part 2 of this podcast to find out exactly what was going on with David and those mysterious voices. Thank you for listening to the Win Happy podcast, which has been brought to you by Fusion Communications. If you'd like to get in touch, feel free to send me an email at greg@fusion.ie. So until next time, take it easy.